On Thursday, January 7, 2002, an anonymous person contacted the police to report that a missing teenage girl was being tortured on an internet stream. This individual recognized her through the posters with the face of the missing young girl. And even though he himself was watching that stream, he decided to do the right thing, saving Alicia from a tragic end. Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel once again. Today I bring you the case of Alicia Kosakevich. What happened to Alicia has to do with unrestricted internet use and lack of parental control. On Thursday, January 7, 2002, an anonymous person contacted the police to report that a missing teenage girl was being tortured on an internet stream. This individual recognized her through the posters with the face of the missing young girl. And even though he was watching that stream because he enjoyed torture videos, he decided to do the right thing, saving Alicia from a tragic end. Alicia Kosakevich was born on March of 1988 in Pittsburgh, a city located in Pennsylvania, United States, being the second daughter of Charles and Mary Kosakevich, who a few years earlier had welcomed a boy. Alicia's childhood was extremely happy as well as ordinary. Along with her family, she grew up in a house located in a neighborhood called Crafton Heights. As her mother was a housewife, Alicia naturally spent much of her day with her and her brother. Despite how much her father worked, he always made room to be with his family. While Alicia's life was not marked by any particular event other than adolescence itself, that was precisely the best part. Until then, she had led a peaceful life surrounded by love. At 12 years old, she attended Carlington Junior High School, where she was already in 8th grade. As a student, Alicia didn't stand out. She was rather an average student who loved poetry and especially writing poems, always showing them to her parents who supported her in that and all her dreams. Although she was still a child who was afraid of the dark and who refused to go out alone after the sun had set, she had also started to have certain teenage interests such as modeling, but she also maintained much of her friendly and innocent childlike personality. That innocence that made her trust in people she shouldn't have trusted. Things were going well for the Kosakevich family until December 31st, 2002. As you know, the end of the year is a symbol of celebration, so they were all gathered to welcome the new year. Alicia left her family for a moment, and without anyone noticing, she simply opened the house door and disappeared. Alicia's disappearance had not gone unnoticed. When, on New Year's Eve, her mother called her down to eat dessert, she noticed that her daughter was neither in her room nor anywhere else inside the house. She hadn't taken any coat with her, nor money, and that made Mary, her mother, panic. Let's also remember that Alicia was afraid of the dark. That night was not only dark, but also covered in snow. Snow that did not let you see the sun in those circumstances was very strange. Going out alone in those circumstances was very strange. After searching around the house, her parents decided to call the police who, considering that Alicia was underage and that she had not taken with her the typical things that anyone who wants to escape takes, started the investigation immediately. Meanwhile, the girl's family started a public campaign in the local media to publicize Alicia's disappearance and get people to be alert, to at least know her face. When speaking with the police, the girl's parents emphasized the amount of time she spent on the computer. So, one of the first decisions the investigators made was to check the family computer in an attempt to find out who Alicia had been talking to and if she had agreed to meet someone the night she disappeared. In the early 2000s, Alicia discovered a new world, one where she could easily communicate with other people. Her parents had hired internet for the house for the first time, which was still a novelty, and therefore there was not so much awareness about the dangers it represents to this day that a child surfs the internet without their parents' supervision. For Charlie and Mary Kosakevich, putting internet in the house was practically a gift they were giving to Alicia and her older brother. They believed it was a tool that would help them study, make friends, and have fun in general. At no point did they think it could pose a danger, let alone that it would be the reason their daughter would experience something truly horrible. Anyway, I imagine they also had no idea what could happen, and that it could happen so unnoticed. Everything that happened with the internet, and that they could track their children about who they could be talking to on the internet, but it wasn't like that. Alicia gradually approached the internet anyway. In fact, at first she wasn't too interested. It was her brother who shared his experience with her and showed her how much fun it could be. Her older brother explained to her that through video games she could chat with other people, something he was already doing. Remember that a large part of the internet at that time was basically news sites, gaming sites, and forum type sites, that is, chats, places where people could ask questions, communicate, to play this video game that was inspired by a board game. But the truth is that he wasn't very interested in playing itself. In fact, he was very bored. What interested her was talking to other people. That's how she discovered Yahoo Chat, where she created a user to talk initially only with her classmates. Alicia, who was quite shy, found in this form of socializing a way to make friends more easily and lose that embarrassment she felt when talking to them for the first time face to face. Quickly, this stopped being a healthy tool that helped her overcome her shyness and turned into an obsession. Alicia was thinking all the time about connecting to the internet to talk with her friends, even though they were no longer just her classmates. Friends had started introducing her to other friends. In turn, those friends of friends introduced her to other friends of friends, and so she was meeting people who she really didn't know and didn't know who they were. As Alicia spent more time on the internet, she began to have contacts with people who knew nothing about real life, like Scott William, a boy who supposedly was the same age as her, and with whom Alicia began to talk daily, initially as a simple friendship. The two of them had a lot of common interests, so they could spend hours talking about it, but they also began to talk about more private things, their own affairs. Often, Alicia would tell him about the things that made her angry or sad and ask for advice, or vice versa. She was convinced she was talking to Scott, and as more than 9 months passed before they agreed to meet in person, on the 1st of January 2002. It seems then Alicia was already 13 years old. Alicia, who had agreed on the meeting date several days in advance, became increasingly anxious as the date approached, even on New Year's Eve, which was a very special holiday for her family. The Kosakevichs had a tradition of having a big dinner to say goodbye to the year, in which her mother cooked sauerkraut and pork, and other close relatives came to their house, like her grandmother, her brother's girlfriend, and others. Alicia had dinner with her family but didn't stay with them much longer. While her parents were picking up the dishes and preparing to tell her that she was going to lie down for a while because her stomach hurt. Then she was going to go to her room to rest for a while to see if it passed and she could eat dessert. The truth is that this was not a typical attitude of hers. That is, no one would expect Alicia to do what she did, because instead of going to bed to lie down for a while, she went to the front door because all she wanted was to go meet Scott, with whom she had agreed to meet that night in her neighborhood. He had told her that all they had to do was open the door and he would be there. So the situation was innocent enough. She would just see a friend, just meet this person with whom she had been talking about her family for 9 months. So convinced that she would meet her family. So convinced that she would meet her friend, Alicia took advantage of her family still being in the kitchen and stealthily went out the main door of her house to meet Scott. It was already quite late and too cold, so there was no one on the street. Even so, Alicia walked about a block looking for her friend until she realized the danger she was running. A voice inside her told her to leave. I remember standing on the corner and finally a small voice spoke, my intuition, and said, "Alicia, what are you doing?" "This is really dangerous. You have to go home." Unfortunately, when the girl decided to listen to her intuition, it was already too late. As she turned around to go back home, she heard someone calling her by her name. It was a man much larger than her who forced her into his car without letting go of the hand he was holding onto so tightly. In fact, the man was holding her hand so tightly that Alicia thought he was going to fracture it, but she didn't tell him, although she did ask him to let her go. In response, the man squeezed her hand even harder and demanded that she be good to him, that she be quiet and stay still if she didn't want to end up in the trunk of the car that he had cleaned just for her. At that time, the Sopranos series was very popular, and she then had this idea she was going to get out alive. From that moment on, her brain was going to get out alive. From that moment, her brain conditioned itself to obey him or else he would kill her. That's what she interpreted. Extremely scared, Alicia began to cry silently while her kidnapper took her to an unknown place. After several minutes of driving, they passed through a toll booth and Alicia was filled with hope. She believed that the toll booth staff would notice her crying in the passenger seat and call the police to help her. She thought that upon arrival, the person would notice, they had to realize, and then she could escape and this would end there. But that didn't happen. No one rescued her. The man, the kidnapper, paid the fare and they let him continue without anyone even noticing her crying in the car, or at least without anyone caring, and it really makes you wonder how many times this situation happens or how many times it happened for no one to really care that there was a distraught girl in the passenger seat. Her kidnapper continued driving for another 5 hours until they reached Virginia, where he stopped the car and made Alicia get out to drag her into his house, where he led her to the basement. All of this again without anyone caring about what was happening. To the girl, the basement seemed more like a dungeon filled with strange instruments designed to cause pain. Among all the things there was also a cage, whips, chains, and many other elements that had the same purpose as the previous ones. Without wasting time, Scott O, who had introduced himself that way in recent months, undressed the girl and warned her that very bad things were going to happen to her, so it was okay if she wanted to cry. While making this clarification, he placed a choke collar around her neck with a chain and a choke collar around her neck with a chain and on, where he abused her for the first time. During the days she was held by that man, Alicia was chained, whether in the basement or in her captor's room, who continued to abuse her and torture her in ways that those things ended badly for her. The times when those things ended badly for her. The times he had done it, the man simply beat her. At one point, it went so far that she resisted, and he, in response, broke her nose. So Alicia decided to be obedient and submissive in an attempt to please her kidnapper and prevent him from killing her. This new, calmer, and much more pleasant attitude allowed her some benefits, such as being fed something that he had not allowed her while she was resisting. Alicia spent most of the day working or simply was not at home. When she returned, she immediately started working or simply was not at home. When she returned, she immediately started the abuses and tortures towards her again, which she broadcasted over the internet. This situation repeated itself for 4 consecutive days. Alicia didn't really know what was going to happen. She wasn't particularly planning to escape either and thought that probably at some point the worst was going to happen. Then, on the 4th day, he came and told this 38-year-old man who had started to get dressed because they were going to go for a car ride. Very scared, Alicia obeyed, but she was convinced that he was going to kill her. She understood that becoming fond of her meant that maybe he wouldn't be able to get rid of her later. Terrified, she got into the vehicle and sat in the passenger seat in silence. She had no idea where they were. She didn't recognize the streets or any other detail that would let her know where they were. Certain that she was nearing her end, Alicia kept obeying her captor's orders. It was then, while they were moving, that a very important person saw them. It was one of the broadcast viewers who finally recognized her. By that time, the search for the girl had been public for days, and the subject had already suspected. It only confirmed it for him. It was then that, using a public phone and without revealing his identity, he called the authorities and had been broadcasting Alicia's torture and abuse live. He also added that he had just seen her. The investigators were still analyzing the computer when on Thursday, the 7th of 2002, this anonymous person contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation to report what he had seen. Immediately, this person who was broadcasting live on Yahoo became a suspect. The one who had been broadcasting how he was abusing and torturing a girl on the internet, but also provided more interesting information. He said, for example, that when asked who the girl was, Scott had explained that she was a teenager from Pittsburgh with whom he had been chatting for months and that he had gone to pick her up at her house days before. He even showed pictures of Alicia. The man who had anonymously called the Federal Bureau of Investigation found this extremely strange and had decided to search the Pittsburgh News for any missing girl. That's how he came across the Post-Gazette newspaper's website, where they had published several pictures of Alicia, a girl who had been missing since January 1st. Convinced that it was the same girl in the videos, he called the authorities to report his discovery. Although he refused to identify himself, he was afraid that if he did, they could consider him guilty of the case or an accomplice. Thanks to the information provided by the anonymous informant and the information extracted from Alicia's computer, the police were able to discover Scott's real identity. His name was Scott Tyree, and he was born in 1963 in Heatherton, Virginia. With utmost urgency and help from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, his IP address was sought, and thanks to this, a postal address was obtained that was connected to the address of a house in Heatherton. A group of special agents was immediately sent to that address. When around 4 in the afternoon, Alicia heard people entering the house while her captor was working, she feared the worst. She thought that since Scott had not been able to kill her, perhaps because he was growing fond of her, he had decided to send people to finish the job for him. At no point of rescue. Terrified, she tried to stay quiet, hoping for rescue. Terrified, she tried not to make much noise. In fact, she hid and held her breath. But at some point, obviously they realized she was there, and the officers found her just a few minutes later. She was immobilized, tied by the neck with a chain that barely allowed her to stand. Officially at 16:10 in the afternoon, Alicia was released and transferred to Innova Fairfax Hospital to provide her with medical attention and ensure that she was physically well. The authorities decided to place her under the care of Fairfax County Social Services while her parents arrived at the location. Let's remember that she was just 13 years old. After securing Alicia, the police and the Federal Bureau of Investigation focused on locating Scott, who was working at that time. Half an hour after freeing Alicia, they arrested her captor at his place of employment, a technology company. Scott was taken to the detention center in the city of Alexandria, where he was held in pre-trial detention until his trial. The investigation focused on his neighbors and relatives. They thus discovered that Scott had moved a couple of years ago to number 700 on Alicia Street. Since 1995, he had been paying the owner of Alicia. Since 1995, he had been paying the property owner a rent of $1,000, almost always in cash, which showed that he had a good income. His job as a computer technician was well paid, but he didn't know how to manage money, so even though he had a good salary, he ended up in debt or buying completely unnecessary things. Among other reasons, his poor money management had caused his wife, Sarah, to leave him in the mid-90s. They had been together for 8 years and had a daughter together, but despite the love, the marriage seemed unviable. About his single life, his neighbors in Virginia couldn't say much. He was a rather private man who usually kept himself away from the community. However, several of his acquaintances invited him to spend New Year's Eve with them. Scott declined all the invitations, saying he would spend the night at an Alcoholics Anonymous party. Since then, he hadn't noticed any strange movement in his house, but some were struck by the fact that the windows of the place were all closed in the first days of the year, especially since Scott always had them open. But this had been the only strange thing they noticed. When they spoke with the kidnapper's ex, she assured that this was Scott's first brush with the law. There was no indication to suggest that he had done the same thing before. The trial against Scott Tyree began in September of 2000. He was found guilty and the judge sentenced him to 19 years and 7 months of effective imprisonment, although he served 16 years. In February of 2019, Scott was released on parole. One of the conditions was that he had to spend some time in a state transition house. Ironically, he was assigned a place in Pittsburgh where Alicia's parents still lived, who filed their claims and demanded that he be moved to another site. For their complaints to be heard, Charlie and Mary presented their request to the Federal Bureau of Prisons. On the 22nd of March of that year, a judge ruled that Tyree should be relocated. However, his parole did not last as he was returned to jail for violating the terms and conditions of his release by visiting websites dedicated to pornography. But incredibly, on the 22nd of September 2021, he was once again released. From the moment of her release, Alicia wanted to transform herself into someone who would help others who had gone through the same thing. A year after the events, at 14 years old, she founded the Alicia Project, a group that aims to help take into account the risks that the internet carries and help children identify possible predators. Today and for several years now, Alicia is a personality on North American television. On several occasions, she worked with Investigation Discovery to produce programs that educate the public and achieve a change in terms of internet safety, missing persons, and human trafficking. Alicia spent all her life from her kidnapping specializing in internet safety, although she also has a master's degree in forensic psychology. In addition, in 2018, she helped arrest over 1,000 internet predators, and that's just in the state of Wisconsin. In fact, you can look her up on YouTube. She has a YouTube channel with her same name. If you want, just put it in the search bar and there it will be. There are several interviews she has talked about other cases, so she dedicated the rest of her life to raising awareness about what happened to her. And that's how we come to the end of the video about this person who survived her kidnapping and torture. And well, this is where we end this video. Tell me what you think below in the comments. I'm reading them. Once again, thank you channel members for your support. With nothing more to say, here is a new video and a recommended one. Subscribe by clicking on my face. See you in another video. Goodbye.